Okay. Okay, great. Okay, well, can we each have you start with a 1 to 2 minute introduction? Tell us a little bit about your life story, what your professional background is, what your education is, what sort of civic involvement, whether you've been on, various boards or committees or advisory groups, that kind of thing. And then lastly, why you're running for office. TJ, we'll start with you.
Sure. My name's TJ. I grew up in Florida. I've lived on the West Coast for maybe the last 8 or 9 years. I lived in Portland the last 3 years. I am a housing case manager and a housing organizer. Um, I've been working to talk to renters, knocking doors, doing renter survey, organizing around a renters bill of rights here in Portland that's inspired by one that was just passed in Tacoma, Washington. And I decided to run recently because I just want to see more done. I work with houseless folks in our county every day, and I see the challenges. I see that we don't have enough funding for vouchers. I see that there's lots and lots of barriers, even if you do have a voucher, to getting accepted as a tenant. And for folks that don't have vouchers, but maybe are low income, it's really hard to afford a place to rent. So my decision to run was very simple. I think that we actually have simple solutions ahead of us for doing a lot more for our homeless neighbors. One of them is funding more vouchers. Another one is providing eviction support. And I would love to see the county implement these, but I haven't seen them in any of our plans that we release every year, and they're not in our current homelessness response action plan. So I'm running because I see the problems every day. I have a really good idea of what some simple solutions are for us to get more people housed, which would also help our mental and behavioral health crises and addiction crises. And I just think we need more working class folks, more renters, and more people that are providing direct services, leading the county, which is responsible for these services and responsible for the funding and planning of them. So I would love to bring that perspective to the board.
Who's your employer?
Cascade AIDS Project. They are a
Okay.
nonprofit that helps specifically HIV positive houseless folks get into housing and also access other medical, addiction, and other basic services.
And tell us again what your role there is, your job description.
I'm a housing navigator. So I work with folks that both are receiving vouchers through our program, which is funded by the Ryan White Act, and also folks that don't have vouchers but do have a limited amount of income. Either they are like receiving Social Security benefits or disability benefits, or they are working, but they don't necessarily have enough income to like easily find a place on the private market. So I help them find subsidized units or just other affordable housing.
And what sort of civic involvement have you had? Have you volunteered for organizations or have you sat on advisory committees, anything like that?
Yeah, I've volunteered with houseless shelters here in the county. The co-chair of the Democratic Socialists of America's housing working group. I lead another small working group of housing organizers that's organizing around forming a metro-wide tenant union. And I would say that's the civic involvement currently, and that's a lot of my my daily life revolves around housing work specifically.
Got it. And what's your role at the DSA? Sorry, you're the co-chair of
I
a
co-chair their
specific.
housing working group for the Portland
Okay.
chapter.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yep.
Great. Julia, you want to go ahead?
Sure. Hi, I'm Julia Brum Edwards, and I'm here to ask for the Willamette Weeks endorsement for a full 4-year term on the Willamette County Commission. Some background about me: I've lived in Southeast Portland for more than 50 years. I grew up here. I went to Glencoe, then Washington High School, now Revolution Hall. I went to Oregon State. I spent the last 30, 40 years both as a community leader, but working on our community's biggest challenges. So I have a host of legislative experience. I worked for the U.S. Senate in Washington, D.C. I also worked in the Oregon legislature. I've served for 11 years on the Portland School Board as a volunteer. I volunteered in my kids' schools and done lots of community activities in my sort of 40 years that I've been an adult in Multnomah County. I also serve on the Oregon State University Board of Trustees. And I also have managed my own company, but also worked for 17 years at Nike. And why am I running? As I said last spring, I decided to run for the county commission because my home community, which I know and love, was under great stress, facing some really significant challenges. The city and county was working in silos, millions of dollars and millions of unspent dollars are sitting in the county treasury while there was a crisis in our streets. And I felt the county was headed in the wrong direction. I felt that the skills I had and my track record of results and my experience, that I could help the county change directions and get after its biggest challenges. And I think that in the last 10 months on the county commission, I've done exactly that. I'll just give you a couple of examples. Since I've got on the county commission, we have committed almost $20 million to expanding our shelter capacity, hundreds of new shelter beds to provide safety, basic services, and a pathway to housing, which is the ultimate goal. I also successfully pushed for the county to stop being ideological about the type of shelter it was going to provide, that we needed to actually fund a whole host of different varieties, whether it was Bybee Lakes, which kept 175 shelter beds, or committing to fund the city's task sites, which again, hundreds of new shelter beds, and we know are providing a pathway to housing and giving people safety and security. I also was tapped to lead the design of a much needed 24/7 drop-off sobering center. The legislature has recently allocated $25 million for that, and we're moving ahead. I've also advocated successfully for the legislature to change the flawed ballot measure 110 to address the deadly crisis of fentanyl on our streets. About 1% a day is dying of fentanyl overdose. I've also questioned the slow pace of the county work when we're in the midst of a major crisis, that we really needed to be taking urgent action. We need to stop studying the problem, dithering, and get to work. And I feel like I've got my elbows out. I've also successfully pushed for more investments in community safety. And I've been fairly relentless in speaking out for greater accountability, transparency, and also that we implement the recommendations of the elected county auditor. Too often, the county audits just sit on the shelf and haven't been implemented. The recommendations, which whether it's the animal services shelter or the joint office, would actually allow us to deliver better services. So I would just say I have only had 10 months to get to work, but I feel like I have made a difference and there's a lot more work to be done. And if I'm reelected to a full 4-year term, I'll continue to push for action, results, and hold myself accountable for delivering what I think our community is really demanding we get after, which is the 3 big issues: homelessness, the behavioral health challenges we face, and public safety, all of which the county has a key role to play.
Great, thank you. Julia, I know our 3-month mark, I think, for the fentanyl crisis is nearing.
Day 83.
83, we got 7 more days. From your viewpoint, or from where you sit and what you know about what we've actually done, what have we done during this crisis, and has it actually made a dent in anything?
At the very beginning, I said collaboration is not an outcome. It's a way of working, but collaboration is not an outcome. And I had 2 huge, I've been pushing for a declaration for 6+ months when I first got on the council. So it was disappointing it happened late. And I had 2 key issues with the declaration and how it's played out. One, from the very beginning, the city and the state said it would be focused on downtown and the Central East Side. And I said, yes, and if you go to East Portland, there are hundreds of people who are overdosing on fentanyl and dying. And if we're going to have a strategy to reduce overdoses, reduce deaths, that it ought to be a countywide strategy. And I have yet to see that. We have countywide data now, but not a countywide strategy, which I totally expect that for East Portland. My second issue was, again, they didn't set metrics. Commissioner Myron proposed a set of metrics, which, she's an emergency room doctor. She practices street medicine. She sees people all the time that are both overdosed or people who have died from overdoses. And she produced a set of metrics, which I thought would have been very helpful, even if we couldn't accomplish things in the first 90 days, but to use as a benchmark. Again, collaboration is not an outcome. And she had very clear I think benchmarks and goals we should set up, like a reduction in the number of overdoses, a reduction in the number of deaths, how much Narcan is being distributed, what are the most how do we measure the most effective strategies during the fentanyl declaration? And then on the supply side, what actions are we taking to actually reduce the supply coming into the region, and not just into downtown and into the Central East Side or into Old Town, but into the entire county?
Have we done anything?
I think I'll be interested to see. I understand they have a news conference at the end of the 90 days. And I'll be interested to see what they are recommending and what outcomes they are stating have happened. I think much more work needs to be done. We can't afford to have somebody dying every day in our streets from fentanyl.
From what you know, have we had any outcomes from this 90-day emergency?
I believe there have been more arrests for dealing, is my understanding. In addition, one of the outcomes, and this is it's my understanding, one of the few places where they've actually used the sort of emergency procurement powers, which you get through the declaration, is that they brought peer mentors to work with the bike patrol, so that when they encounter somebody who's using fentanyl, or sounds like after they've been revived from an overdose, that there's a peer mentor to provide help. And that's, I haven't seen the data of what the outcome of that is, but it's a tangible change that I've seen, but we haven't seen the data of like a reduction in overdoses. And since, I'm just to say one last thing, and since there's only a focus on one area for the county, I've seen no data outside of the central city area that there's been.
Okay. TJ, can we focus on your sort of housing? It sounds like you might have some issues with how the county is currently doling out its homelessness dollars, where it's putting them towards. What do you think the county should be doing more of with those dollars? And what do you think they should be doing less of with those dollars?
Yeah, well, for one, they need to spend the money. Multnomah County's been abysmal in actually spending the SHS dollars that we're getting. Part of that is allegedly because we have a lot more than we ever were expecting to receive, which is a huge boon. And we've just done a terrible job of actually getting any money out the door. It was expected that Multnomah County would be the best at this out of Multnomah, Washington, and Clackamas because they have the most developed relationships with providers. But we've seen that both Washington and Clackamas have done a way better job of spending their funds. And we've created some shelter beds, but Washington County has created way more shelter beds much more quickly. And they've been working with direct service providers much more closely. So one is that we need more transparency on why our funds aren't being spent. We know that providers are requesting funding and being denied and being told that the funds are already allocated, but they're not going out the door. And two, if I'm looking at, let's say, the homelessness response action plan for how funds are going to be spent in the future, we have a couple programs for increasing vouchers for specific groups, which are good, like folks coming out of incarceration, youth that are aging out of foster care. But we aren't increasing the general supply of our number one way of getting people's housed, which are our ARLA vouchers, our area regional long-term rent assistance vouchers, which can go to anyone that qualifies for them, and it's not just like groups coming out of specific settings. We know right now that our wait lists are thousands and thousands of people long, and most people go on them and never come off of our wait list because we aren't funding enough of those ARLA vouchers. So I would spend more money on housing vouchers, and we need to spend more money on our behavioral health care. And we need it more immediately. I guess a question coming out of the discussion that you just had on the fentanyl crisis is I'm wondering, like, what actions is the county taking? If we've had about 3 months already and we've been waiting for this declaration to come and the declaration has come, I haven't seen any reports of what the county has been doing, what actions are taking. Even providing peer support to like bike teams is like certainly not enough for the severity of the crisis. I think the things we need to stop doing, I disagree with the repeal of Measure 110. I think that's going to be a disaster. I don't think we need more arrests of people that are on the street using substances. I know as a housing case manager that having arrests on your record, having debt from public fines is a huge barrier to actually getting accepted as a tenant. Even if you have a housing voucher, even if you can afford your rent, you can be denied as a tenant because of your criminal history. So I think it's absolutely the wrong direction for us to recriminalize. And we know that it won't work. It hasn't worked for the decades leading up before Measure 110. It hasn't worked for any of our neighboring states that continued to have criminalization. So I don't think that that's the right direction at all. What I'd like to see for the SHS funds are more housing vouchers. I'd like us to fund eviction support for tenants that are in eviction court, because right now Multnomah County has the highest eviction filing rate in the state. 90% of them are for non-payment of rent, not because tenants are in any violation of their lease or are bad tenants or bad neighbors. It's just because they can't keep up with their rent. And only about 5 to 8% of tenants in Multnomah County have eviction representation versus 82% of landlords. We know from right to counsel programs in New York, Philadelphia, Boston, elsewhere, that when we provide eviction legal representation, that tenants vastly increase the number of tenants that stay in their homes through eviction proceedings and are able to deal with back rent that's owed. It reduces the financial burden on them and reduces the debt that they leave court with. And all of those are things that help keep them housed. And it also reduces the number of tenants that face a second eviction in the future. So those are the programs that I like to see our money going towards. It's really simple to make a huge change in our homeless crisis. And it's just, we have about 5% vacancies in our residential stock. We have some of the highest office vacancies in the country. 30% of our offices sit vacant. I'm sure you all see that every day walking around, seeing the urban works signs on empty restaurants and buildings and offices. We need to, one, work on acquiring and converting those vacancies. The county needs to work on building more permanently decommodified social housing. But for the vacancies we already have, for the rental units that are ready to house people but aren't being filled, we just need to fund more vouchers, and we could get thousands of more people.
Hold on, let me stop you there. So let's talk about this, these Arlo vouchers. And this is a question for both of you, Commissioner Bram Edwards. Why aren't there more of these? Is there not enough money, or where's the problem?
Well, this last fiscal year, we had about $100 million in unspent SHS funds that were not expected. And then because of that, not budgeted for. And we have huge carryover every year since SHS funding started. So we do have the funding for it.
The money's there, but it's not getting, why isn't it getting into the hands of these people?
I would give
I'm just going to I would like to respond to a couple things. One, when I got on the commission, it was 4 days after they'd approved the budget, and the unspent and the unanticipated dollars, which equals about 100 million, existed when I got on the county commission. One of the first things I did, and this is going to go back to sort of pushing for more urgent action. When I got there, it was like, hey, we just finished passing the budget. This is when people take time off and everything else. And I was right away pushing for, like, we have these unspent dollars. It was clear that not only did we have unspent, but then there was also the unanticipated because of the first year's of the tax, and people didn't know they owed it, so they paid it late. And I really pushed to get that out the door and get it allocated. And we did allocate lots of money, unprecedented money in that, in those unspent and the unanticipated dollars. I will just say there was also, and I wasn't on the commission at the time, a huge increase in rent assistance that was used from the COVID dollars from the federal government. So I'll just say that it did go out the door, and we had a lot of other needs. For example, for immediate shelter, because getting people off the streets and to safety, to basic services on the path to housing, to get them stabilized, was also a way that we knew for the chronically homeless was really important. So we did dedicate resources to shelter. We also knew that they needed services. We spent money on a stabilization center.
But do you disagree that you do two disagree on the fact that these funds were not spent?
Well,
I think we're in agreement, like the county should have done something. And as soon as I got there, I really pushed hard. And if you look at the most recent, we had a third quarter update the other day at the board. to show the pace of spending, and they're on track to spend the resources that were allocated this year by the county commission.
So TJ, can I ask this real quick? So, you know, obviously like there are finite SHS dollars, even though there's a lot of them, they are finite. And if you'd like more of that money to go to housing vouchers and long-term assistance than currently is going, where would you take that money away from and how it's currently being spent under the county? Like, where do you think the county is overspending SHS dollars? And, you know, you think they should go more to rental assistance and housing vouchers. What do you think they're spending too much on?
Well, I still haven't seen where the 100 million funds are going to. I think the last report on how much of these funds have been spent so far, and we're like 3/4 of the way through the fiscal year, is like less than 30%. I don't know if that's still well, you could let me know what our current spending level is at. But I think one problem we have, and where we're just bleeding money, is the fact that we spend such a huge amount on rental assistance without having any programs to address the fact that so many of our residents need rental assistance because they can't afford rent. We don't have local rent control. The state legislature has banned local rent control. So all of our localities, including Multnomah County, are forced to allow 10% rent increases every year. And we see that a vast amount of our SHS funds are going towards just stopping the bleeding from people that are already housed becoming homeless because they can't afford rent. So we actually need programs that reduce the cost of rent and have more aggressive rent control so that we can spend less money on rent assistance and more on moving people that aren't housed into housing. But I think that will take more work. And in terms of like the other places that the money can come from, I think there's just a lot of money that's absolutely unspent, isn't allocated, and it can be used for this. So
Julia,
yeah, I would need to see more from the county about where the funds are, because that's not something we have a transparency into as the public right now.
I would just say it's absolutely transparent. We spent the summer in work sessions, partially because I really pushed for that we have work sessions. I was the first commissioner, even though I had only been there a month and a half, to like put something on the table about how we should spend the money. Subsequently, all the other commissioners did as well, and then we collaboratively like reached an agreement on how the money would be spent. So it's all posted online, TJ, about how the allocations, and there were some, when I've asked the head of the joint office for cases in which I have had complaints from some providers of, for example, the day center providers, which was a sort of new bucket of money that we felt like we needed to allocate so that people had someplace to go, so they weren't in the libraries or the parks, but they actually had services. So we allocated money, for example, to Blanchet House and Rosehaven, but they had never been county providers before, but we knew they could expand services and provide really important day center services for people who were living on the streets. Because they were new providers, they had to do the whole, we had to do our fiduciary responsibility and make sure that they met the criteria. Same thing with Bybee Lakes. So it did, for those who were new providers, it took additional time to get that money out the door and to make sure that we were making sure that they had audited financial statements and everything else. But you can see where the money was allocated, and you can disagree with it. It was a process by which there was a significant allocation for rent assistance. And I will tell you, the head of Ways and Means, Representative Sanchez, did tell us pretty clearly that they weren't going to continuously just send money to counties to pay for rent assistance because it's not sustainable. So absolutely, yes, while we're in the middle of the crisis and getting some of that out the door, and we're going to need permanent supportive housing, which is a form of rent assistance, but to just provide general rent assistance as the county did during COVID is not a sustainable practice, because frankly, then you wouldn't be able to do anything else with the SHS dollars.
Can I ask, like, so you're saying 100% of all the funds, including the extra 100 million, are allocated. What percentage have we spent so far in this last fiscal year?
So you could go online and look at the agenda from the last meeting and look at the supportive housing services Q3 update that was provided that will show you that we're on track to spend the money that we told Metro. So each of the counties have to put out a spending plan for the year that does include contingencies and a reserve. and here's how much we're going to spend. And as of Q3, we're on track to meet our expenditure targets, which is also what Metro said at the same hearing. And you're,
And will we have carryover funds into
it's
the next year?
it's all posted. You can go look at it, or I don't, you must not be coming to the county commission meetings because that was posted and presented within the last 2 weeks.
I saw that we expect a
Okay,
lot of money to carry over into
let's
the
move on
future.
from just homelessness. So
Okay.
TJ, can you talk about one other top priority you'd have, different from mental health, different from homelessness, behavioral health that you would have if elected?
Sure. I mean, I think that is the number one issue facing our county. I think that's what's on most people's minds. But I think some of the other things that affect the quality of life and cost of living in our county are like addressing utility prices, addressing the cost of transit. Our transit prices have gone up in the last year. And I think that if we want to like develop the city that Portland can be, we need to do things like reduce our dependence on cars and increase public transit and reduce the cost of using public transit. But I'll be completely honest, like my campaign is primarily focused on housing because it's the biggest issue. It hasn't been solved. And every question I've gotten throughout this process, like from various news organizations and endorsements, has been about housing. And I think that is the right focus. And I think it's like kind of a mistake to really try to move on when we aren't hearing real solutions to the homelessness crisis. So like, to be completely frank, that is my background and that's my focus and that's what I'm campaigning on and that's what I would solve as a commissioner. And I think it's sad that we release plans every year that don't actually lead to us meeting any of our goals and that we continue electing officials that aren't bringing a change to our focus. And yeah, I mean, I'm here because I'm fed up about that particularly. I'm fed up that we have 11,000 folks living homeless on our streets, and every year we do very little for them.
Okay, you want to do one, each ask a question of each other?
Can I respond to that? I also want to go back to just respond to something about ballot measure 110. If you look at what the legislature did in House Bill 4002, they very deliberately provided off-ramps, like a pre-arrest off-ramp. So if somebody is caught using fentanyl or some other drug, that there is an off-ramp pre-arrest, and which is why the 24/7 sobering center and receiving center is so important. There's also an off-ramp at the court stage. So I would just say, I don't believe it's going to necessarily lead to more arrests unless there's another criminal act that's in addition to the use of drugs. But just for the use of drugs, I don't believe there's going to be a big spike because the legislature very deliberately created what they call deflection options. And that's why they gave Multnomah County $25 million to stand up this receiving center with sobering services. Because I think and TJ, I think you and I agree on this, is that the best thing to have happen is to have more treatment beds available so that people, when they're ready for withdrawal and treatment, that they actually have access to it. And right now there's a 40% gap. And so in addition to standing up a sobering center, really building out more treatment beds so that, again, the intent of House Bill 4002 is to give counties some flexibility, and other counties, I think you're right, there will be an increase in arrests because they're going to not choose deflection, but that's not the route that Multnomah County chose, which is why we also received the additional funds. So I just want to say, I'm not advocating there be more arrests for people just, who are struggling with addiction.
Right. We do know from your plan that the choice for whether deflection services are used lies with law enforcement, right? They decide whether or not they will bring folks to the sobering center or if they have cause for arrest. And like the county doesn't have much oversight over that.
Oh, I've had plenty of conversations with Chief Day, and Chief Day was on the core project team of and they've been the biggest advocate. It's not safe for people to be on the street severely intoxicated, whether it be alcohol or drugs. And they've been the biggest champions and the loudest voices since the sobering center closed in 2019 to like, we need a safe place. It's not only for community safe, but it's way safer for that individual to be sobering in an environment in which there is a whole coordinated care team, peer mentors. So they very much, I think, intend to use that. Now I say, if there is a co-occurring criminal act, yeah, I think the expectation is just because they have.
But that was already true before repeal, right? If there's a co-occurring criminal act, arrest could happen regardless
I
of
don't
whether or
think
not
it's my
there's
understanding
substance use.
from all the conversations I've had is, and this is again, one of the reasons why they've been such advocates, the Gresham Police Chief, the sheriff we need this a place to take people where they'll be safe, they'll be monitored, they'll get support, and hopefully connect to peer mentors, withdrawal treatment,
Agreed.
get access to withdrawal services and treatment. I mean, that's the ideal. And then ultimately to recovery housing, because we know that's a key piece as well, because you leave treatment and you just go back out on the streets. The likelihood that you're going to fall back into addiction is very high.
But we've repealed Measure 110 now, and the first beds for the treatment center won't open for a year. We have a couple beds available for things like detox, but I think we're going to have a terrible year for folks that are facing addiction now and don't have that diversion pathway yet.
Well, there is we've been very clear. I've had conversations with both the governor and with Senator Lieber, who was a key leader, is that they have been very clear, like, we've given you $25 million. We expect you to set up a deflection. And they had to make counties had to make a very deliberate choice of whether to choose deflection or whether we're just going to arrest people. And, a fair number of counties said, we're going to just arrest people. But Multnomah County didn't choose that. And we know that we can do better, and that there's a better path for people who are, using fentanyl, in public spaces or in private spaces. And that we'd hope that there can be a path to treatment.
Okay, let's move on. Do you want to ask the pre-K question?
Yeah, I was just curious what each of you thought about whether or not Multnomah County should forego the increase in the pre-K tax that's scheduled for, is it 2026?
2026, yep.
Yeah, it's supposed to go up, and that tax has drawn a lot of complaints from people. What's your view on that?
You want me to go first, TJ, or?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
I'm the first candidate in this race to pledge that I would not allow any more delays in the tax to roll out. I mean, that was overwhelmingly approved 2-1 by voters. I think the Preschool for All program is really important for working families, and I absolutely would not allow any more delays in the tax rolling out that voters already approved. And I mean, this was already presented to the county recently, that the people paying the tax, like a lot of everyday residents in the county are not responsible for the Preschool for All tax. So in terms of like where the complaints are coming from, I don't think it's largely the 2-1 voters that voted for this in the first place. I think we should stay the course with the plan that voters already approved, and we should get to work implementing and continuing to implement Preschool for All.
Are you concerned at all that the tax burden in Multnomah County is causing a bit of an exodus among the people who pay that tax? It's paid by a pretty small number of people, and the data show that a lot of these people are moving across the river, Clackamas County, places like that. So our tax base, especially for these kinds of taxes that hit the higher income people, there's data showing that it's eroding. Are you concerned?
Well, yeah. My first thought is we have seen such an unprecedented amount of tax income for things like the supportive housing services and the green tax, because the income at the wealthiest levels in our state is even higher than we anticipated a few years ago when, say, we approved the supportive housing services tax. So what we're seeing is that there is a massive amount of wealth and income at the top of our tax brackets, and continuing at the bottom of our tax brackets are people that don't have basic services. So my job as a potential county leader is to think about, well, if the county's job is to provide services, we need to stay focused on people whose basic needs are not being met. And I'm not concerned about our, like, this myth of sorry, I shouldn't call it a myth. What you're saying is true that some folks are leaving the county, but I don't think that that's going to like outbalance the fact that we are getting more money than we ever anticipated from taxing our highest tax brackets. Like, we are in a really good position to utilize those funds. And I don't think we're going to see a type of exodus that like ultimately takes that away from the county. And I think we need to stay focused on the fact that we aren't even doing some of the most basic services for our most needy residents before we think about like whether or not businesses that are making an incredible amount of revenue, which is what qualifies you for some of these taxes, need that burden lessened.
Commissioner Brim Edwards.
Yeah, thanks for asking the question. And I'm going to start by saying, having served 11 years as a volunteer on the Portland School Board, I'm a huge advocate and I know the value of early education, sort of full stop. Portland Public Schools runs the largest Head Start program in the state, actually. And so I know how important that is for kids to be ready for kindergarten, and that really sets them up to be successful in school. Having said that, I think I would say I'm concerned about two things. One, there's been a massive underspend. There's like millions of dollars sitting there, not being utilized. Most of the slots were, many of the slots were conversions of existing slots. I mean, I know they did that with PPS slots, just adding in. And I will say the person who was the champion of putting on the ballot has recommended a delay in the implementation of the increase. We had that presented about a month ago from Chair Vega Peterson, who was sort of the champion of it. I said at the time, I think, we should not only consider, the 1 year delay, which she recommended, but also a longer term delay until we see actually how the money is going to be spent. Because right now it's like not actually funding preschool for all or anywhere near it. And I'll just say from a second standpoint is like, I am concerned about the overall just taxes in general for a couple of reasons. Well, first of all, because they fund essential public services, and I happen to be in a role both with Portland Public Schools and with the county commission in which tax dollars actually fund really critical services to our community. And we've already seen what happens when you start losing population. You lose your tax base, whether they're the people paying the tax or not, you're losing the tax base. And I will say, when you look at what happened to downtown with all the empty commercial buildings, that has an impact. Because one of the things is like those buildings are now assessed at a lower rate. And for example, the local option at Portland Public Schools right now, the $1.99 rate raises $109 million. But because of the deterioration in commercial values downtown, next year we're going to have only 100 million. So we're going to see a drop in taxes. So I think it as the responsible position is to be looking at whether you think people should be paying more taxes or not, looking at the mix and what the result of people leaving the county has upon our essential public services, because businesses leaving downtown because of the conditions are actually resulting in less dollars from public schools.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I think we better ask our fun question.
Yeah, fun question. If you were to have a movie made about your life, what actor or actress would play you?
Just because I've gotten this before, Darren Criss.
Oh, I can see that. Dark hair.
What can I say?
Strong eyebrows.
Okay, I only say that I'm an introvert, like who's not necessarily considered a very funny person. So it may be surprising, but I love Julia Louis-Dreyfus. And I always think that I tell people when we're dealing with really serious issues that if if we weren't laughing, we'd be crying. So I find a lot of humor in every day, her role as Elaine on Seinfeld, like just the humor in everyday life. You got to find it, otherwise you'd be crying. So
Totally.
That's true.
Yeah,
All right.
absolutely.
Well, thank you both. We
Yeah,
really
good
appreciate
stuff. Good
it.
conversation. Really good.
Yeah, thank you all. And thanks,
Yeah,
Julia,
that's
too.
thank
delightful.
you.
All right, stay safe. Enjoy the weekend.
Bye, y'all.